So in this episode of the artist feature for Hans Zimmer, I'll be looking at the structure of his tracks. And this one's a little bit harder to sort of show because I've only really got one track where I've tried to implement it. But really, the article states, and I'll sort of explain it a little bit here, that normal structuring, especially in orchestral pieces, you would expect it to go from imagine sections A, B, C, D, or you might even have a similar song structure where you'd have almost a verse and then the chorus and the verse again, and you go back to the chorus, and so you've got that same melody that you've heard from the first chorus. With Hans Zimmer, at least in my experience of listening to those tracks, the structure can be, not all the time, but can be slightly unique. And actually listening to my track, I noticed that I may have thought the structure was slightly odd because you couldn't hear the timing of the track enough, which is an interesting thing because there's a part in my track where it goes down to pads and atmospheric things, and I'm keeping time with my foot. The tempo doesn't change, the 4/4 is still there, the time signature doesn't change, and I'm keeping time with my foot, so I believe, and then I'm out of time. And I think, oh, that's funny. And that was happening with the Hans Zimmer tracks that I was listening to. So in a way, I've managed what I was trying to do with the key features, but it might not have been in the way that I thought it would work. So anyway, his structures are generally due to the fact that his pieces of music are scores for films. So if a scene changes in possibly a random moment in terms of the music, of course there might be an abrupt ending to something that might be, maybe it's an 8-bar section and you're expecting it to go on for those 8 bars, and then all of a sudden it stops on the 7th. I don't know if it's perhaps a placebo that I was picking up while listening to the tracks, or if it was actually the case where some things were stopping in a random moment. I noticed it was actually in a few of the Batman tracks that, I think it was Why So Serious, where the track would sort of build up, and all of a sudden it just went silent, or almost silent. There was a very small sub in the background of the track and of the film. So structuring is a weird one. But my example, or at least my attempt at it, is just do something you wouldn't normally do. In this track, I was building with strings and brass, and then I cut it down to a piano and a harp, and I believe that was used in a track that he did. I can't remember the name of it. It's in my notes somewhere. I'll put it in the description. That was different for me. I don't normally do that. It wasn't what I thought of doing, but it worked. So I'll play the example now, and you might agree with me in terms of structuring, you might not, but the point is, try to be different. Try to structure your tracks differently, especially when it's orchestral. I wouldn't necessarily say this is a good idea for a song that's meant to have lyrics and things like that, but there's no harm in being different, and it will catch people out, and that's the main thing. They'll remember it because of that slightly different choice in structuring. So I'll play the example now. I'll play the first little section so you hear the free flowing movement of the melody and all the different instruments that are in there, and then it will cut down to a soft piano and a harp, and I believe the tempo increases as well. Yeah, so it goes 20 BPM higher from 80 to 100. So here we go. Without playing the whole track, Basically, I used different articulations, different instruments to build the track in a slightly different way. I also changed the tempo. That is a pretty key thing here. Whether or not Hans Zimmer does that often, I know he definitely does it, and as it's a real orchestra, more often than I'm assuming it's a bit more free-flowing than being exactly 100 like I have in my session. But the main point is I go from a free-flowing melody which doesn't have any staccato instruments, doesn't have anything like that, to going to a soft piano, a harp, and then bringing in some staccatos, and then build from there with a higher tempo. I wouldn't have done that normally. I would have kept building from where I was. I might have added some more drums, things like that. Maybe increase the tempo while having those instruments going. But when bringing it back down to just 2 instruments, it brings you back down to earth. It means you can build again. You don't feel overwhelmed by the other instruments or by all the instruments. So that was my first little example of changing the structure. I do a little bit again here after a little bit of a rise again, which once again I wouldn't normally do. So this is the main thing. It's whether or not Hans Zimmer did it all the time doesn't completely matter. It's trying to be different with your structuring. That's what I want to get out of this. So the other part where I change is this little section at the end here. Now this is a big old section of chords, slight melody, but then the structuring changes and the instruments change, and that goes along with the structure. Basically, the instruments will change. I take it from the violins and the brass and the slight soft piano beneath it to going back to the piano and the harp, just like the other section. It's like I'm taking a break between going from A to B to C to D. I'm going A to Z to B to Z to C. And then it completely changes with the synths, and then I even lose the saw that's doing the pitch bend sounds and things like that, and so we're left with harmonics and some pads, and that's when you lose the sense of time and the sense of tempo. So trying to keep in time with it with your foot, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I've got to go. All of a sudden the breakdown saw, the saw that is doing the pitch bendy sounds, comes in at a time that I don't expect. It's still in time, but I'm out of time, and I think that's what's really great about losing all the instruments, bringing it very atmospheric, and then playing something that is in time, but not giving your audience a way of keeping in time, if that makes sense at all. And I think that's really interesting, and that's what Hans Zimmer does, or at least I felt while listening to Hans Zimmer's work. So anyway, that was structuring with the Hans Zimmer artist feature. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.